practical support and advice to tenants and landlords about keeping pets in their rented properties. Really warm welcome, Jen. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. So I'm Ben Toomey. For those of you who haven't seen me this week or ever, I'm the Chief Executive of Generation Rent. So we've been hosting Renters' Rights Awareness Week all week. We are the non-profit voice for private renters across the UK. And it's been a really jam-packed week talking about all sorts of things from evictions to repairs, to anything that involves your rights as a renter. I've said before, and it may come up in this session as well, that this is a really exciting week for us because the Renters Reform Bill, which is one of the most important laws we've been pushing for in Parliament, is on the cusp of making some more progress. So on Monday, it's going to come back, that's tomorrow, it's going to come back to Parliament and be debated for the first time by MPs. And that has some bearing on what we're doing now. But the point is, this Renters' Rights Awareness Week we do every autumn, and this autumn we're going to tell you about your rights as they are now, but we're also hoping that when we come back and have you join us next year, that you'll actually have stronger rights and better protections as well, not least of all in the area of pets, which is Jen's specialism. So Jen, do you want to tell us a little bit first before you go into your presentation about what it was that got you involved in this area and fired up about the need for people to have the right to pets?
Yes, certainly. It was 5 years ago, 2018, and I was volunteering with a local rescue. And we had instances of people having to surrender pets because they were moving and not allowed to take them with them. People who wanted to adopt pets but couldn't because of stipulations in their rental contracts. And we also were able to help a gentleman who did want to adopt a pet but was being told no by his housing association, and we successfully challenged it with them and were integral in them amending their policy to include, in this instance, indoor cats being allowed where there were communal areas or communal entrances.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jen. And we're very glad that you did get involved because it's been growing and growing as a movement almost since, I believe. So really excited to hear more about what your take is on how people should approach having pets in their rented property and what their rights and protections are around that as well. So we'll get onto your presentation in just a moment, but before that, for those of you that want to get involved as we're talking, we'd love to hear what you're thinking about the presentation, what you're thinking about the webinar, what your experiences have been, but you can tag us on social media to do that. So we're at, if you're on Twitter, we're at Gen Rent, that's GenRent UK, so at Gen Rent UK if you want to tag Generation Rent, and it's at Advocates EM, so ABVOCATSEM is to get Jen's organisation tagged on Twitter. We'd love, especially if you're going to share an experience or an opinion, put a picture of your pet in there as well, because we love to see as much of that as possible, brightening up social media, but also making the case for why these lovely animals that we all love so much belong with us and are part of our lives and belong in our homes where they can be part of our foundation for our lives as well. That's how we talk about homes at Generation Rent. It's such an important thing to us, and we don't want to see any type of tenure. So whether you're private renting, whether you're in social housing or you own your own home, we don't think there should be any difference really in the way that you're treated and the way that you can set up your life and the way you can enjoy your home as well. So with that in mind, please do tag us if you're on Twitter. If you're on Facebook as well, you can find us with the names of our organisations. But without further ado, let's go over to Jen to tell you a bit more about what you need to know. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you very much. Right, let's just do the technical bit.
That's as seamless as it comes. You're in.
That's certainly the limit of my technical ability. So, as Ben has introduced me, my name is Jen Beresay and I'm the co-founder of Advocates East Mids. We're based just between Derby and Nottingham, and we work on the ground offering practical help to both tenants and landlords, and have also campaigned nationally for a change in the law. Presentation this afternoon aims to set out the current position and some of the reasons behind it, and also a look at the proposed new legislation. And I understand we're going to be doing questions at the end rather than all the way through. So bear with us, jot down anything you want to ask me. and we'll have a look at the end for that. First of all, a little bit about Advocats, along with one of my favourite pet memes. We were established in May 2018 to facilitate pet ownership in the rental sector. And as Ben said, we provide a free support and advice service to both landlords and tenants. We are funded via our own fundraising and by donations that we receive. And the acronym CATS, Campaign, Action, Teach, Support, actually covers all pets. We realised within the rescue that with pets, no doesn't always mean no, and that sometimes a decision could be challenged and a landlord's opinion changed. So taking a little look at that in a bit more detail, our campaign work highlights the profile of the problem of pet ownership within the PRS. We campaign to include awareness of that with the government and with the general public. We take action by compiling documentation to demonstrate responsible pet ownership and speak to landlords and agents on a tenant's behalf. We teach by running information days in high footfall areas locally, attending regional meetings of various landlord organisations, and participating in webinars such as this. And we support just by being there for the tenants or the landlord that we're working with. It's important for them to realise that they're not alone. Now, if you own a pet, I probably don't need to tell you this, but let's just run through some of the benefits of pet ownership. Physical health and activity levels. Dog walks, for example, can be the only exercise that some people get, particularly elderly tenants or perhaps those who are unemployed. There are mental health benefits to pet ownership. 91% of dog owners and 89% of cat owners said that their animal helped them cope emotionally, specifically through the COVID-19 pandemic. And that animal ownership combats feelings of loneliness and isolation. And again, I think the pandemic really highlighted that when people who perhaps by nature of their job or their social life were completely alien to understanding loneliness and isolation until they were suddenly shut in their own four walls. Pet owners are 60% more likely than non-pet owners to get to know people in their neighbourhoods and build support networks. So the interaction with local community is very important. And also pet owners tend to be more long-term tenants. So from a landlord's perspective, that means they get to avoid expensive void periods and the process of selecting new tenants. And this is what might interest you most. Enhanced pet ownership could lead to savings of 2.45 billion to the NHS annually. And that's just through things like reduced visits to GPs and less prescriptions for things like blood pressure medication and antidepressants. So let's have a quick recap of the current situation and the chain of events over the last 4 years that's brought us to where we are now. First off, we have the Tenant Fees Act, which was introduced in July 2019. Its aim was to stop unscrupulous landlords and letting agents charging ever more ludicrous fees and deposits for pretty much anything left, right and centre. They wanted to regulate those fees and charges that could be made. The Act introduced a deposit cap of 5 weeks' worth of rent and a very limited list of permitted payments only, which tended to centre around things like utilities. Under the Act, it was no longer legal to charge a separate pet deposit, which had been the norm for people renting with pets prior to its introduction. However, figures obtained in 2021 indicate that there are 20% fewer pet-friendly landlords at that point since the introduction of the Act. Sadly, now we believe that figure to be much higher, and I think it's currently less than 4% of properties on search engines like Rightmove and Zoopla. Less than 4% of properties are described as being pet-friendly. 18 months later, in January 2021, the government introduced their new model tenancy agreement. Its default position was that pets were to be allowed, but unfortunately, there was a lot of misreporting around its introduction, and a lot of people believed that this was now law. It wasn't. The model tenancy agreement is not legally enforceable. It has no powers of legality at all in its favour. It's over 50 pages long, and as such, very unpopular with landlords, landlord bodies, and letting agents. And from a freedom of information request that we did in the summer of 2021, it was being used by less than 3% of landlords. And certainly since its introduction, less than 10% of landlords have modified their stance on pets. It is a purely voluntary template. It is not the law. On the 1st of September 2021, we launched our Heads for Tails campaign, and we proposed to amend the Tenant Fees Act and make renting with pets easier. And the two methods that we were proposing were adopted was to allow a landlord to request pet damage insurance or a capped pet deposit, not just another week's worth of rent, but an actual financially capped pet deposit to be added to the list of permitted payments. And I must say, at this juncture, you'll see that there's a lot of names there that were supporting us in this campaign. Generation Rent, although very supportive of Advocat's work on the ground, were not in favour of the particular recommendations that we were calling for. It's very important that I make that distinction. There are just over 40 organisations there that did back our campaign. From the rental world, there was the National Residential Landlords Association and Property Mark and the Property Redress Scheme. And from the animal welfare world, there were organisations such as the International Cat Care, Mars Pet Care and Pets at Home. And we also had cross-party support by over 40 MPs and peers, literally all parties, including SNP and Green. And just to recap again, that the Heads for Tails was not something that Generation Rent put their name to. In spring 2022, we launched our What's the Damage survey, which was a co-polling exercise with Landlord Zone, which is an online forum, National Residential Landlords Association and Property Mark. And we wanted to try and unpick a landlord's experience of pet damage. Over the course of a month, we had 537 responses from both landlords and letting agents, representing portfolios of under 5 properties right up to 100 plus. We found that 50% of landlords had been unable to recoup all costs of damage that had happened during tenancies. Now, this was often a combination of adult damage, child damage, and pet damage. The first two are covered by insurance, the third less likely to be. But more positively, 2/3 of those who responded to the survey saw an insurance-based solution as being the way forward. I would also say that we put similar questions from this survey via the Association of Independent Inventory Clerks, and they actually ranked child damage above adult and pet damage, whereas our survey put adult and pet at round about the same, with child in second place. And to bring us up to date, last year in June, the Renters Reform Bill was finally announced, and its second reading is to take place tomorrow. And it's the government's intention to pass this legislation before the next general election. Now, the Renters Reform Bill basically looks to legalise what they put into the voluntary model tenant, and that is the default position is pets are allowed. And if a landlord is asked if someone may keep a pet in their property, he has to come up with a reasonable excuse to refuse. There is a lot of talk about what is reasonable and what is not. We'll come on to that in a little bit. The landlord's decision can be challenged. There isn't that set up at the moment. And landlords are allowed to, or will be allowed to, stipulate pet damage insurance should be held. That was one of the recommendations from the Heads for Tails campaign, but the call for a separate capped pet deposit being an alternative option was not taken up by the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. That is a lot of information to take in, and hopefully I've made it as straightforward as I can. But the important thing is that we all understand the problem, and we'll be delving into that a little more in a moment. We look at the tools that you have at your disposal to help yourselves, and a look at what you can challenge and what you can't, currently and going forward. Let's take a look at the barriers to pet ownership. The type of property that you're living in, the rental contract that you have, the attitude of the landlord, and in some cases the actual letting agent, the hot rental market that we're currently experiencing, and if there's any leasehold terms to consider. Overall, pet policies affect some 76% of tenants. That's a combination of those tenants who already have pets or those who aspire to have pets but currently can't. These are the main types of property that tend to be considered: HMOs, or houses of multiple occupation, flats and apartments, high-rise, properties with communal access and or communal gardens, sheltered housing, and your standard house, be that terraced, semi-detached or detached. HMOs are expected to be one of the reasonable refusals to allow pets that a landlord will be able to use, and that's largely because of things like allergies and phobias. Looking at your rental contract. Do you have one? If you don't actually have a rental contract, so if there is no tenancy agreement in place, you are entitled to have a pet. The only reason that pets are not allowed in most cases is because there is a properly drafted clause prohibiting pets. But that clause is only enforceable if it complies with the unfair terms rules, which now form part of the Consumer Rights Act 2015. They require that the clause to provide for the tenant to request permission to keep a pet, which the landlord should not unreasonably refuse, and if that wording is omitted, the clause becomes unenforceable. So if you don't have a rental contract, or the clause within the contract is not drafted with that wording, basically you can have a pet. So what is a reasonable excuse? Well, for the part of the Renters Reform Bill, this is yet to be finalised, but we believe that allergies, phobias, and the type of property are going to be considered within that. And the type of property, particularly leasehold terms, is something I'll come on to in a moment. We then have the landlord attitude. Sadly, not everyone is an animal lover. And a landlord is less likely to allow pets if they've had a bad experience in the past that's left them seriously out of pocket. However, bad news also travels fast, and there are a lot of horror stories shared on landlord forums which lead to a lot of anti-pet hype, even though the instances are very uncommon in some of the severity that they talk about. Give you an example of that as misinformation. Lots and lots and lots of landlords will cite potential problems with flea infestations as being a reason that they don't allow pets. However, if your pet is in receipt of good flea and worm control, this is not going to be a problem. A survey carried out for the Perfect Landlords campaign run by Cats Protection found that whilst 66% of landlords who didn't allow pets were convinced that they would have a problem with fleas, only 2% of the landlords surveyed who did allow pets had ever experienced any problems of that nature. Lack of knowledge. A lot of landlords will come up with the line that if you have a pet, you have to have a garden, which is simply not true. And again, as an example, you have indoor cats who do not use a garden, and they can be classified as indoor perhaps because of disability or injury, and their being outside is simply not safe for them. So there are a lot of cases where a landlord can be educated into what is acceptable and what isn't. I mentioned the hot rental market and the shortage of rental properties in both the social and private housing sector. And the NRLA in the first quarter of this year mentioned a 33% figure for private landlords in England and Wales looking to downsize. Against that, 10% of landlords only were planning to increase their portfolios. And as we all know, there are not enough new homes being built. Viewings for any new listings book up within hours. I have it on good account that agents actually dread new instructions at the moment because they're aware just how crazy things are going to get. And this means that if you have viewings booked up and a waiting list, then on average, 11 applications per property are being made. That figure is higher in London. I believe it's in the low 20s. So that means landlords are able to cherry pick tenants, which again can cause problems for people, not just with pets, but also with children as well. And it's important that if you find a landlord who's pet friendly, you need to sell yourself. You need to make you stand out head and shoulders above other tenants. Now, I mentioned leasehold terms. This is something that really isn't very much known about within rescue circles, animal welfare circles, tenant circles. It's not generally known knowledge. So let's look at leasehold terms. The difference, first of all, between freehold and leasehold. Most houses are freehold. That's not saying every, but most houses are freehold. And that means that you own the property and the land that it's built on. So in that case, if the landlord buys a house freehold, he owns that house, he owns the land that it's built on. The landlord is responsible for both the property and the land and has a high degree of control over it. He is responsible for settling any disagreements with neighbours. The landlord would not pay ground rent or any upkeep fees. Leasehold is when a landlord would own a property for a fixed period of time. And again, not a sweeping generalization, but most flats and apartments, particularly if they're in purpose-built blocks, will be leasehold. So the landlord themselves are a tenant, and whoever owns the freehold is their landlord. You only have the right, the landlord only has the right to use the property for the length of the lease. There is a ground rent applicable and upkeep fees. And a leasehold interest that exists in between a flat lease and the freehold is known as a head lease. So the owner of the head lease is the immediate landlord of the flat owner. And a lot of head leases will specify no pets. Currently, that can't be challenged, and a head lease is expected to be the main reasonable excuse for landlords being able to refuse pets in their properties. This cannot currently be challenged. There is talk about reforming the whole of the leasehold system, but it is just talk at the moment. There is nothing in the pipeline. So if there is a head lease on a property and it states no pets, then it's no pets. So leasehold terms aside, if there are other areas you think you can challenge, then here are some of the things that you can do. You can obtain a landlord reference. If you're currently renting with pets, or even if you haven't rented with pets before, but consider you've been a good, responsible tenant, ask your landlord for a reference. They can be gold dust when looking for a new property. You can also look at a vet reference. The vet reference can provide several indicators of responsible pet ownership. For example, the flea worm treatment, or if you don't obtain that through your vet, perhaps you buy it online. Produce some evidence that you buy it online, receipts from Amazon or Vets Online or whatever it might be. I'm sorry, vet reference can also include that the animal has been microchipped, has been neutered, and is up to date on its vaccinations, all indicators of responsible pet ownership. Other types of reference: who else sees your pet? Could be a pet sitter, could be a dog walker, a grooming parlour, perhaps even the rescue that you've adopted from. Any of these people can provide a reference to say that you are a responsible pet owner, that they see the animal regularly, that they are happy with its upkeep and how it's being looked after. And certainly if you can get a reference from the rescue, they are only wanting to adopt out to responsible pet owners. So that can be very valuable as well. You can produce a pet CV. This personalizes the request so that rather than a landlord being asked to allow a dog, he's suddenly being asked to allow a cuddly bundle of fluff called Rover, who spends most of his time asleep on the sofa and likes going out for walks just once a day. It can give the information to a landlord to make an informed decision rather than just a blanket no. You can take pictures of where you're currently living. Focus on common areas of damage where people might expect to see pet damage. So, for example, carpet at the foot of stairs or the end of countertops and doors, that sort of thing. And then there's pet damage insurance. Now, whereas until the Renters Reform Bill comes through, a landlord cannot currently request that you have pet damage insurance, but there is nothing to stop you offering it. There are a number of providers, and as the bill progresses through Parliament, more and more insurance companies are looking at introducing products for pet damage insurance. And to give you a rough idea, for around about £15 a month, you can look to secure around £4,000 worth of cover for your landlord, which is going to add up much faster than them asking for pet rent, and also provides you with an ability to then demonstrate no claims information should you want to move in the future. You can find examples and templates and resources and more information at the following: our own website, Advocats, Battersea, Cats Protection, and Dogs Trust all have a lot of valuable information and resource that you can use when looking to move to a different rental property with pets, or look to get a pet where you are currently. At the moment, there are far too many animals finding themselves in rescues, animals that had perfectly good, loving and responsible homes. They are taking up valuable rescue space, which is needed for genuine hardship cases and strays. Change is urgently needed, and we welcome the fact that the Renters Reform Bill is taking its next important step. And now, I believe we open up for any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jan. That was really, really helpful. I wonder if you want to stop sharing your screen just so that everyone can see your face again as we take the questions. I found that immensely useful, and was particularly struck by the cost savings to the NHS that you mentioned of 2.45 billion if there was enhanced pet ownership. So yeah, there's not only the human case, not only the animal case, but also the actual cost saving that the government could make as well. So I can see how powerful your advocating as advocates has been to get this into the Renters Reform Bill. So really well done getting it in there alongside your partners and ourselves calling for this too. So fantastic work. Just going to open up to questions. So do, as I said to people in the audience, do put into the Q&A if you have any particular questions you'd like to add. We've had a few come through already, and I just want to give a shout out to Colin, who was involved in my webinar on Thursday as well around repairs. So Colin, you've obviously been engaging fully with Renters' Rights Awareness Week, and you've always had fantastic questions. So we'll go to one that struck me as quite an obvious question, particularly when you were talking about gardens, Jen. And it's, how is it differentiated, the wide variety of pets between, for example, a goldfish or a big dog or anything in between? Is there, in terms of the law and in terms of the way landlords operate, is there a distinction there?
There isn't a distinction. There is a sort of definition of a pet, which is taken from, I think it's one of the animal welfare bills. I can't recall it off the top of my head, but there is a definition of a pet. You would think that a landlord would automatically allow a goldfish, because what harm could a goldfish do? But within the What's the Damage survey results, we did have a landlord who had allowed his tenant to have a tropical fish tank, and something fell on the tropical fish tank and broke the tropical fish tank. And that was an awful lot of water suddenly all over the carpet and fish. So there is a damage element there. So not necessarily something you'd immediately think of, but all pets do have the potential to cause some sort of damage. And I think we have to be realistic about that. And even as the absolute most responsible pet owner, there can still be instances where damage could occur. And I think we at Advocats and the Heads for Tails campaign recognise that underneath a lot of the vitriol from the landlord community, there was actually a genuine concern about their ability to recoup costs, which is why we did the Heads for Tails report.
Fantastic, thanks, Jen. And just thinking about the kind of cost side of things and the proposal now that they can require insurance again. So maybe it's worth us touching briefly on the Tenants' Fees Act, because as you say, that was much needed legislation to stop the rocketing costs that there were on tenants. Generation rent was a big part of calling for that. And within there's obviously been an unintended consequence, as you say, of fewer pet-friendly properties now being available. So it's absolutely right, the Renters Reform Bill is addressing that. At Generation Rent, we were keen not to see a kind of a premium put on pet owners where they had to pay extra in deposits, particularly given that we're often hearing from renters about spurious claims on deposits that happen after they leave, and then not be able to access money just when you need it, which is at that moving point where you need to get your moving costs and your new deposit together. But the pet insurance question is a lot easier to address, I think. Within
Yeah,
that, though, it does say about Jen, it says it could be that the landlord requires the tenant to get insurance, or it could be that they require the tenant to pay the landlord to get the insurance. Do you have a kind of preference on what that would look like? And is one maybe better than the other?
I don't think one's better than the other. I think it's important to have the options, because there are some landlords who would rather have more control over any type of insurance policy, and there are some tenants who may already have the insurance in place, so it makes sense for them to keep it up. Affordability is, of course, a major issue, but landlords who do currently allow pets are as often as not charging a pet rent, which they can do without breaking the Tenant Fees Act. This can typically be £25 per pet per month. So each pet that you have is costing you £300 extra in rent a year, and you're not necessarily getting much back for that. The landlord, it takes a while for those £25 to add up to cover any damage that may occur, and you're not getting any demonstrable proof that your pet isn't causing damage. So, for example, the average person may have a couple of cats, cat and a dog. That's £600 extra rent per year, whereas we campaign that an insurance policy premium of, I said, around about £15 per month actually covers your address rather than one specific pet, and gives you the benefit of being able to show no claims. So that was our position and why we adopted it.
Yeah, I can see exactly why that would be. It was you're stuck between a rock and a hard place at the moment if you're being charged a pet rent. We also heard from one of our supporters just recently, building up to this webinar, who was saying that they'd tried to get a rental property. They'd tried 12 different times before they managed to find somewhere that would take them and their dog, essentially. And I'm guessing with your service that's not uncommon to hear people really banging at the door and not able to find somewhere that's pet friendly.
It's really difficult at the moment, and as I said, if you do find a landlord that is willing to consider pets, and we do believe that a lot are willing to consider. The current portals give an option of saying yes pets or no pets, and that's a little bit too black and white. There does actually need to be a grey area where landlords can say, yes, we will consider pets, and then it's looked at on an individual basis. Certainly, I think that it is good to have the option, as I said, as to who's in charge, whether it's the landlord or whether it's the tenant. And I think we need to be on at property portals to try and get them to amend their stance, and we have tried, and to make it pets considered. And if you do find a landlord who will consider pets, then you need to sell yourself. You need to set out your best store with all the information and backup that you can provide that says you are a responsible pet owner, you look after your animal, and you're a good bet for the landlord.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Jen. I just encourage people to put questions into the Q&A again if you have any more. There's a question from someone talking about the landlord can still refuse a request to have a pet, but has to give a good reason now if the bill passes. So I think you were mentioning about how that could be challenged, you hope, if they do just say no. Is there any detail in the bill yet about how that might be challenged?
No, it's a little bit woolly. No, there isn't any cast iron information on that, but landlords are aware that they will have to have a reasonable excuse for refusing, and there will be some definition of what reasonable might be. And as I said, that's expected to detail allergies. Now, that might be not necessarily the landlord, it might be the letting agent that would do the routine inspections and what have you that has an issue with allergies. Ditto phobias, same sort of thing. But we do expect that the main reasonable excuse is going to fall under leasehold terms.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. And there's also something if there's a super landlord, as it were, a landlord renting off another landlord, so you're subletting, which is often through the leasehold, as you say,
Yeah,
then that's written into the bill, isn't it? That would be a reason for them to be able to refuse. So you kind of
that's
need
right.
you need to go up the chain to find who's saying no and make sure that's reasonable.
Yeah, and often we've come across instances where landlords are saying, yeah, you can have a pet, because they haven't checked out the terms of their superior lease.
Mm.
And it's something that everyone really needs to be more aware of, both rescues who are looking to adopt out, because a lot of them just ask for proof of home ownership. Now, with the rental market being the way it is at the moment and rents rocketing, a lot of building societies are coming up with mortgage products better suited to long-term tenants. So if they can demonstrate that they can pay a pretty high level of rent regularly, then they will have mortgage products open to them. But what is the most common type of property most people buy first as their step onto the property ladder? Something like a flat. Flat's probably got leasehold. People might not know that. Get a pet, show a rescue that they are a homeowner, get a pet, and you get a whole heap of problems.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen again because we've got a few ways in which people can help on Renters' Rights Awareness Week with Generation Rent. So just while I'm asking you the last couple of questions, Jen, I'll just put this up so that people can see it. So hopefully that's clear for people. So just thinking about another question that we've had that is about mental health, and well, more of a comment than a question actually. It says often people with mental health conditions find having a pet soothing for their emotional well-being and so on. And you kind of referenced that in your piece, and I'm imagining that's maybe part of the NHS cost that you reached as well in terms of savings too. Do you want to say a little bit about how having a pet isn't just a nice to have for some people? It's in fact for a lot of people it's a part of their life, it's a part of their family, it's a big part of their well-being.
Exactly. Most people see their pets as part of their family, and you develop a huge bond with your pet. Certainly they're very good for stress reduction. Stroking a pet has been demonstrated to reduce blood pressure and calm people down. And it's not just conditions like blood pressure and perhaps depression, but it's also conditions like autism. Lots of autistic people, and children in particular, find that they're able to express themselves via a pet and be calmed and soothed from potential triggers by a pet. So that there's all sorts of different ways in which pets are such valuable contributors to the family. And since the pandemic, this has begun to be recognised more, and that can only be for the good.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jen. Really well put. And then a final question for you before we wrap up is, what would you say that landlords that are refusing pets, as you said, no doesn't always mean no if you're able to kind of demonstrate actually some of the things that you talked about. But what is the biggest fear for landlords then?
It is damage.
Yeah.
It is damage. It's they talk about urine and feces markings, and they talk about fleas. And usually with dogs, they talk about dogs sort of eating furniture and eating kitchens and eating doors and that sort of thing. Now, there's so many issues to address within that, things like separation anxiety for dogs, and perhaps it's then ideal that you don't leave your dog for a long period of time. You have someone that's able to pop in and see it. Perhaps you use a dog walker if you're at work, things like that. But that is the overriding concern that comes back from landlords, is to do with damage, because most landlords have less than 5 properties. Some only have 1 or 2 properties, and they've become what's termed accidental landlords. So they've perhaps inherited a property, so they've decided to rent it out. They can't afford to be out of pocket, so they are very, very risk averse in terms of who they're willing to rent to. And it's working hand in hand with the new legislation when it comes in to show that there are bad pet owners, there are bad parents, there are bad single tenants. It's just a fact of life, but there are things that you can do to demonstrate that you are a responsible pet owner and that you look after your pet and that you will look after the property. And I think it's important that hand in hand with the legislation, we look at ways that people can demonstrate that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jen. And that understanding of what landlords want or need or fear has been so important to your campaigning, I think. I think that's why it's been so effective to address those concerns head on. So we're just going to wrap up. So just have a last look for those of you who are watching at the ways you can help us at Generation Rent. So stay in touch with us, share your experience, do get involved in our research and our campaigns if you can. And there's also a prize draw. We're doing some fantastic books available, signed by authors talking about the housing crisis that you can be part of during this Renters' Rights Awareness Week. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. And Jen, if I can just hand over to you for the last word. If people are looking for any further advice and support, can you just point them to where to go? And are there any parting words you'd like to give to people who are currently in this journey of renting and trying to make sure that their pets can stay with them and enjoy their time in rented properties?
Certainly. I mean, you can go to anyone with any queries can go to the Advocats website and send in your queries, and we will try to address them and help where we can. We are advocatseastmids.org.uk. And as I mentioned in the presentation, all the main national charities, Cats Protection, Battersea, Dogs Trust, they all have information online about things you can do, templates that you can use for CVs and things like that. And I think just to finish, I'd say that pets are so important. It's very hard for people who are not pet people to understand it, but pets are hugely important in our lives. And if we look at the value that many pets bring, not just within the family, but through their own work, through police and rescue, and through crime detection, through their ability to help with various medical conditions, even spot some medical conditions before someone realizes they're ill. Pets are so valuable to us, and it's very important that this legislation goes through and we welcome it.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Jen, for putting your case across so clearly for us. And that actually brings us to the end of Renters' Rights Awareness Week in terms of our output of webinars and podcasts that we've done this week. So what a note to finish on. Some not only really clear advice and templates and support available for people regarding pets and renters' rights, but also some hope for even strengthened rights coming up very, very soon. So if you're interested in the Renters Reform Bill and how it progresses, do keep up with that online. Generation Rent are always covering that, and we'll be covering it live tomorrow when it's debated in Parliament, probably late tomorrow afternoon into the evening. And I'm sure, Jen, you'll be posting various things as well from Advocates' point of view too. So stay in touch with both of our organisations if you've enjoyed this webinar. But all that remains for me to say is thank you so much to Jen Beresay for a fantastic presentation and for standing up for all of us as renters to have that right to have pets in our homes and as I say, enjoy them as part of our families and part of what it means to have a home that is your own. So thanks so much for your time, and thank you everyone for enjoying this presentation and for being part of Renters' Rights Awareness Week. It's been a really